Madam President, I rise today again to call attention to the irresponsible and reckless fiscal path we find ourselves as a nation, and to urge my colleagues to act now to take the first step toward meaningful, comprehensive tax and entitlement reform through the enactment of the Saving America's Fiscal Future Commission Act, which I introduced with Senator Joe Lieberman. And I urge my colleagues to take the time to read a recent letter from Senator Lieberman and I urging their support of this legislation. The SAFE Commission has broad bipartisan support outside of Congress, including the Peter J. Peterson Foundation, the Business Roundtable, the Concord Coalition, the National Federation of Independent Business, the Brookings Institution. I think if you can get Concord Coalition and Brookings Institution to support a piece of legislation, it's got to be pretty bipartisan and fair, and also the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. All of these back the SAFE Commission concept as the way to tackle tax reform and our entitlement crisis. As you may know, Madam President, recently Chinese Prime Minister Wen Jiabao publicly voiced his concern about the security of the, quote, huge amount of money China has invested in the United States, saying, quote, to be honest, I'm definitely a little worried. He then went on to call on the U.S. to maintain its good credit, to honor its promises, and to guarantee the safety of China's assets. Madam President, I hope this frightens you as much as it frightens me. China is the United States' largest foreign creditor, holding an estimated $1 trillion in U.S. government debt. Though it may be unlikely due to the complex interdependent relationship that we have with China, if China were to call in that debt, sell off its holdings, or direct its foreign investments away from the United States, the impact on our economy and our national security would be devastating. I've been saying for years that we cannot allow countries that control our debt to control our future. And the fact is, and I think this is a statistic that most Americans are not aware of, is that foreign creditors have provided 70% of the funds that the U.S. has borrowed since 2001. As a result, 51% of the privately owned national debt is held by foreign creditors, and that's going to be increased significantly because of all the borrowing we're doing. And they're mostly foreign central banks. And these leaders, or these lenders, are starting to express significant concerns about the status of our fiscal situation. And to be frank, they should be concerned, Madam President. Our spending is out of control, and as a result of our debt is skyrocketing. When I arrived in the Senate in 1999, gross national debt stood at $5.6 trillion, or 61% of our GDP. The Obama administration recently projected the national debt to more than double to $12.7 trillion by the end of fiscal year 2009. From 2008 to 2009 alone, the federal debt will increase 27%, boosting the country's debt-to-income ratio, or national debt as a percentage of GDP, from 70% last year to 89% this year. So here we are back when I came to the Senate in 99, 2008, the federal debt or national debt was 70% last year, and today it's at 89%, and you can see that we're going to be very closely to 100% of our GDP on our debt. I call this the Pac-Man that's eating up, and particularly the interest that we're going to pay, money that we could be used for other things. Alarmingly, the figures that I've just mentioned don't count our accumulated long-term financial obligations. The Peterson Foundation recently pointed out that the federal government has accumulated $56.4 trillion in total liabilities and unfunded promises for Medicare and Social Security as of September 30th, 2008. Now that works out, listen to this, to $483,000 per American household, or $184,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country to pay for these unfunded obligations. In other words, we have $56.4 trillion in total liabilities and unfunded promises for Medicare and Social Security. It's unfunded liability. And if you look at it per household, it's $483,000, and if it's for every man and woman in the United States, $184,000. To be completely fair to President Obama, our annual deficit and growing national debt have been problems for some time now. And folks, I've come to the floor of the Senate time and time again to talk about paying down debt, balancing our budget, and so forth. And to my knowledge, President Bush never once mentioned the debt in any one of his State of the Union addresses. Over 8 years, it was like it didn't exist. He never mentioned the national debt. And also, another disappointment for me is that he failed to deliver on tax reform as he promised in 2004 at the Republican convention, promised all of us that he was going to do something about tax reform, and he never kept his promise. But under the Obama administration, we've really exacerbated the problem with an omnibus appropriation bill that includes $408 billion in non-emergency funding, a $787 billion stimulus bill, and a 10-year proposed budget where the lowest deficit for a single year is larger than any annual deficit from the end of World War II to President Obama's inauguration. Madam President, I know we're going through some tough times. Over the past year, we've been hit by an economic avalanche that started in housing, spread to the financial and credit markets, and then continued onward to every corner of our economy. I know it well. I'm a senator from Ohio. We are spending money to get out of this economic mess, but we cannot allow that to be an excuse to continue our reckless fiscal path. We have to start finding ways to work harder and smarter, to do more with less, and it doesn't take an economist to realize that our course is unsustainable. I know it, the Obama administration knows it, the American people know it, and so does the rest of the world. I just read a story to my granddaughters, The Emperor Has No Clothes, and I think that's where we're at today. Everyone understands that we have a real problem in terms of our unsustainable debt, the crisis that we have, but for some reason we fail to recognize that we have the problem. According to a poll conducted by the Peterson Foundation, America's concern for the growing national debt takes second only to their concern for their own jobs. The American people know that we cannot continue to ignore our ballooning national debt and our continued deficit spending, which is projected to be $2 trillion this year. $2 trillion this year. I just checked on 10-year T-bills that are starting to reflect people's concern about our future and inflation, and they're up almost 4% today. The Obama administration knows that we can no longer ignore this crisis. And Peter Orszag, who I consider a friend, the Obama administration's OMB director, has even said, this is a quote from the CBO director, or the OMB director, "I don't want to sound like the boy crying wolf, but it is a fact that given the path we are on, two things. One is we will ultimately wind up with a financial crisis that is substantially more severe than even what we're facing today if we don't alter the path of federal spending. And secondly, that if we are on that path in the future and something like we are experiencing today occurred, we would have much less maneuvering to fight those fires because we will have already depleted the fire truck." End of quote. I'd like to say, in due respect to the OMB director, Mr. Orszag, the fire truck is depleted. We're already there. And I'm disappointed. As OBM or OMB director, he has forgotten his commitment to entitlement and tax reform that he so boldly and loudly called for when he was CBO director. You would think that a change in title would not cause such a memory loss on as important an issue as the financial health of our country. To me, it can only mean one thing, that Peter Orszag's boss, President Obama, must not be serious about addressing the growing national debt, or worse, doesn't understand our fiscal crisis, or even worse than that, that he doesn't care.